Thank you for dialing in, MYM Insider. Sorry for the late start. I was having some challenges with technology, and they're still plaguing me. Well, blue screen of death. That's good. Let's see how that works. All right. Thank you, Windows. All right, here's what I need. Chad, will you do me a favor and send me a text message if you can hear me? Embarrassing. Okay. Okay, so apparently I'm still hearable even though my computer has just died. So that's okay, because this is not a webinar where we need actually to show you a bunch of stuff. So I'm just going to press forward and make the best of it here. So I don't know if Chad can record this or not, or what the situation is, but we're going to try our best. And hey, you know what? This is a great thing to happen on today's topic, because today's topic is called The Enemy Within, and it's about all the negativity in your brain and in your life that tries to squash you, keep you from doing great things, and make you think that you suck even when you don't. So let's get right after it after that wonderful start. And shout out to Bill Gates. Thanks for the computer. It's working real great for me here. All right. We're going to start this off. Hang on. I'm going to get this message here just to make sure everything's okay. Then we're going to get going here. All righty. I swear we're going to start. Okay, I'm communicating behind the scenes with those who have information on stuff. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go. Chad, can you record this or not? You see the okay, good. So I'm not even going to bother logging back in. I'm just going to jump in here and go. So here we go. So the enemy within is a topic that I think it speaks to most of us in terms of times of doubt and trouble and trying to figure out what it is we want to do and who we are. We take that youthful, childlike enthusiasm for life, and it tends to get squashed out of us over time as we get older. And I'm going to start this with a little bit of a protracted story, but I want you to understand this and give you an idea. The story is called I Got Lucky. And it goes all the way back to my college days. When I first started out as a freshman, I went to Brigham Young University. And unlike many universities, it's not a party school. And so I did not indulge in a lot of those things that you'd normally associate with college. I did study a lot. And after the first year, I went and served as a missionary in Taiwan for 2 years, from 1988 to 1990. I remember while I was out during those 2 years, I had this sort of thought in my brain, which was, there's a lot of really good reasons why I went and served as a missionary, and I don't want this to sound disparaging because it actually is not. But one of the things that I was thinking was, as I'm out on this mission for 2 years, it's 2 more years that I don't have to make a decision for what I want to do for the rest of my life. It was something that was troubling me. I grew up in a home with an entrepreneurial dad, and I am going to focus these topics today on business owners and being an entrepreneur and getting where you want to go in an entrepreneurial business sense, okay? There's other applications for this, and I'll touch on some of those occasionally, but we want to touch on and focus most of our efforts in this discussion on this item called you're a business owner, you're trying to make things happen, okay? So anyway, I grew up in this house with a dad who was an entrepreneur. He'd been in the real estate business. He dabbled in other kinds of businesses as well, and I'll hear about those in just a second. But I worked for my dad during the summers as I was a teenager, when I was 14 and 15, and I learned one thing working for my dad in his real estate business during those summers, which was I had no interest in the real estate business, not any at all. I love my dad. He's good at what he does. This guy loves real estate like nobody else. It flows in his veins. He'd spend all day, every day doing it. He's 70 91 years old, and I'm sure when he's 97 and he's in a walker, he's going to be walking around apartment buildings and mobile home parks. But I didn't like it at all. I found it to be very tedious, very boring, just not my cup of tea. So with that being said, I really didn't want to go into the family business, but I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I was always the kind of kid while I was growing up that would do entrepreneurial things. I raked leaves to make money. I mowed lawns to make money. I had paper route because that was a great way to earn money. And as I got through with my mission in 1990, I went back to Brigham Young University as a sophomore, and I had 3 more years, and the thought kept coming back to me, well, I still have 3 years to figure out what I want to do. During that same time, as soon as I returned home from my mission, it was actually on my birthday, June 12, 1990, I was 21 years old, and my dad gave me a birthday present that changed my life. And the birthday present, after 2 years of not having seen my family and being overseas and learning Mandarin Chinese and all those kinds of neat things that go along with serving as a missionary over there, my dad gave me this set of reports from a guy named Jay Abraham that taught me about marketing. It was my first exposure to the type and style and sort of genre of marketing that we still do today at Monopolize Your Marketplace. And I got very interested in it. I listened to a bunch of tapes that Jay Abraham had produced. I read a bunch of reports. All of this was stuff that my dad had paid a lot of money for, and then he gave it to me so that I could use it, do whatever I wanted with it. And during the 3 years that I finished Brigham Young University, I got a degree in business. I spent a lot of time getting my own degree in what I'll call direct response marketing via Jay Abraham and a few others, but primarily Jay. And it was an interesting education. But during that whole time, I was scared to death to actually take and do something myself. I didn't know how to do it, and I had this voice inside my head that said, it's interesting, this marketing stuff, but it's also very scary. So when I got to the end of my senior year, I graduated, and I had a kid that was born the day before my graduation, actually the day after, I get those mixed up. My wife still had a semester of school. I didn't know what to do. The job prospects in 1993 when I graduated were terrible. The job market was horrible. The going rate for a business degree starting job was about $30,000. $34,000 was considered good, and there just weren't a lot of those jobs available. So with about less than a year left to go in college, without knowing what I wanted to do and being too scared to do something on my own, I did the only thing I could think of, which is I applied to graduate school. And I didn't have any interest really in going to graduate school, but I wanted to just prolong having to decide what to do. So I applied to Brigham Young University MBA program and University of Texas, where I'm from, not from Austin, I'm from Dallas, but it was in the vicinity. And I applied to both of these schools. Now, meanwhile, I had met a guy that became a good friend of mine when we were freshmen. And the reason that we became good friends is because we were very much alike. He was also very driven. He was also very goal-oriented. And he was the kind of guy that always talked big about doing his own thing. I remember his big goal and idea and thought was he was going to open a bunch of convenience stores and gas stations, and he was going to open them all over the western United States. And he had this just sort of interesting, maybe undefined and specifics, but he had this dream. And as we were roommates as sophomores, he ended up getting married as a junior. I ended up getting married as a senior. He always would talk to me about we would talk about our dreams of owning our own businesses and getting rich and making a mark in the world. Well, interesting thing, my friend, and I won't name his name because, he's still a friend of mine, but I don't see him. I don't connect with him. I mean, it's been 20 years. Time just has a way of wearing away those relationships. But he also was in my same position where he didn't know what to do. He was already married. He already had a kid. He graduated, and he also applied to Brigham Young University MBA program. So long story short, we both get our letters back from the MBA school. I got rejected, and he got accepted. And I was a little bit miffed. I wasn't jealous, but I didn't think he was any more or less qualified than I was. Our grades were very similar. We had similar background experience, which was none. And I was just kind of put out that he got accepted. I was happy for him, but I was a little put out that I didn't get accepted. Also, it caused me to have to face the reality that I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and he got to put 2 more years into school, and he didn't have to think about it. So he went on to school. I got rejected also from Texas. So I took a last-ditch effort. There was a job that came up on campus where I had a chance to get a job overseas in Hong Kong. Now, I spoke Mandarin Chinese. I learned it in my missionary service. And the job in Hong Kong actually dealt a lot with mainland China. It was for a company that imported lighting fixtures from China. And they needed somebody that spoke fluent Mandarin Chinese. And I was very good at Mandarin Chinese. And I competed for this job against 7 other guys. They brought 8 total of us to their facility in California where their headquarters was. And they put us through the ringer. And all 7 of the other guys had degrees from prestigious international business schools. They were all fluent in Mandarin Chinese. And I was just an undergraduate. But I was very, you know, I'm me. And you guys know me a little bit. And I have a way of saying things and doing things. And it came down to me and one other guy. It was a job that would have required a 3-year commitment in Hong Kong. And it paid $70,000 a year, which was over double what the going rate was for jobs if you could find them in the United States. And I got second place, and I missed the job. And they told me, they said, we really, really liked you. The only thing that led us to the other candidate was he had an MBA and you didn't. And if you would have had the MBA and everything else would have been equal, we would have given you the job. They told me that. Now, they could have been lying to me just to make me feel better. I don't know. But that's what I was told. So there I was, sitting in Provo, Utah, graduated from BYU. My wife had a semester to go, and I had no job prospects. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I had no idea where to turn. So I turned where I turned in those situations, and I started talking to my dad. And I said, I don't really know what to do. What do you think? And he said, well, you know, I've got a business down here in Texas. If you want, you can move down here after your wife graduates, and you can work for me. Now, I told you a minute ago I hated the real estate business, so I wasn't interested in that at all. But he'd also started a couple other businesses. One of them was an employee leasing company, and the other one was an office supply company randomly. And he had started it with a young guy. The guy was in his late 20s at the time, and so he's older than I was. I was only 23 or 4 at the time. But he started this office supply company, and they'd grown it to just a little teeny tiny company. It didn't make anybody a ton of money, but my dad said, hey, you're welcome to come down here. I know you're interested in marketing. You can take some of those skills and things that you've learned and that you've been studying, because he kept up with me in my study of J. Abraham and stuff like that. So he said, come on down here. I'll pay you. I can't pay you a lot because the business doesn't make that much money, but I'll pay you $2,000 a month. You'll get benefits, and you know, you can do whatever you want with this business. You can run it, and if you can make it make more money, then you can participate in the profits. And I thought that sounded pretty good, so I moved to Texas on January 1st, 1994. Had a kid in tow. My wife had never, you know, she'd been to Texas to visit once. So we moved to Texas, and I started working for my dad. Well, I quickly found out that I didn't really like the office supply business. I had a lot of problems associated with it. And I started getting the itch to do my own thing. So I started kind of talking to one of my friends that also had similar marketing interests. He ended up becoming my business partner later on. And I got very interested in starting my own business, but I didn't know quite how to go about it. I wasn't sure quite how to pull the trigger. And after about 6 months of working for my dad, I found that I didn't have enough money to pay my bills conveniently. And I went to my dad and I said, you know, this was one of those situations where you wait for just the right moment to approach somebody that you're asking for something. The right mood, the right time, the right situation. And we'd gone to lunch, and I remember it just clearly, getting out of the car, and I'd been chicken to ask him the whole time. And finally I worked up the nerve and I said, Dad, you know, I need to make more money. And he looked at me and he said, oh, okay. So how much money do you think you need to make? I was making $2,000 a month. And I said, well, I really need to be making $2,500 a month. And he said, huh. And he says, so what do you think, you know, how would that make a difference? And I told him, well, you know, I need to buy another car. You know, I've got a kid. All the things that you need money for. And this turns out to be the pinnacle moment that absolutely changed my life. And I owe it all to my dad. I owe a lot of things to my dad, but this particular one thing, because he looked at me and he said, well, let me tell you how this works. All you've got to do is figure out a way to make the office supply company that you work for make more money, and then you can participate in the profits, and you'll make more money. You could make even more than $2,500 a month. And it punched me in the gut like a 15-pound sledgehammer. And I realized right then and there that I had no interest in pursuing the office supply company, and that my dad was right, that if I wanted to make more money, I had to go find a way to bring more value, to make more money in the company. And I decided the way that I would do that was to be in my own company. And that little slap in the face, what it felt like at the time a slap in the face, but it turned out to be one of those good wake you up and smell the coffee kind of slaps in the face, gave me the courage to go ahead and start my own thing. And within a month, I was doing things that I just needed a kick in the pants to do. One of the things we did is I got with a guy that I knew understood the marketing the way that I did, and he was a very good public speaker. And I said, let me promote a seminar. You come down here. He lived in Utah at the time, and you'll put on this seminar, but what I'll do is I'll promote it. And I had an ability to promote because we had, as an asset of the office supply company, we had a fax list of about 7,000 or 8,000 companies that we had built up that we were trying to sell fax paper to via fax, if that makes sense. And we put together a little document. We sent it out over a computer automated fax program to 7,000 something businesses that said, hey, there's a seminar coming up, but we don't want you to come to the seminar just yet. What we want you to do is to get our seminar preview tape. This was in 1994. We didn't have compact discs even then. We had audio tapes. Get our audio tape. Well, the funny thing is we didn't have an audio tape. It didn't exist, but it seemed like something good to offer. So we put it out there, and we got over 220 responses for this free audio tape, which we didn't have one of. And so we tried to figure out a couple of different ways to get an audio tape. I tried to record over the telephone with my friend being in Utah and me being in Texas. I tried to record an interview with him, with me interviewing him, but I was so nervous. I sounded horrible, and it just didn't work out well, and we couldn't record it. And it was a bomb, and the technology to record it on the telephone was terrible, and it just didn't work. And we had these 220 requests for seminar preview tapes sitting there. And I had written 5 articles on marketing based on what I learned from Jay Abraham. And I had sent them, I had never shown them to anyone because I was convinced they weren't any good. But I wrote them with the idea at the time that I would send them out to newspapers, of all things, that would potentially publish these, and I would become a famous marketing author. That was my plan in my youth. This is what I thought would happen. Well, I had just sort of stuffed those away. I had never done anything with them. And when we got desperate for a tape that we couldn't deliver, I went to my friend and I said, well, I wrote these articles. Maybe we could send them. It was a desperation move, okay? And I sent them over to him. I don't know how I got them to him. I must have faxed them. And he had his wife read them, and she said, wow, these are really good. And he agreed, these are really good. And I had never considered that they might be actually really good. So I went to my dad's office, which was also my office for the office supply company, and I stayed up all hours of the night printing on his copy machine and collating with his, what do you call that thing, that comb binding, 250 of these reports. I mailed them out. I used my own money that I didn't have any of, and I sent out these reports with an offer to come to a seminar if they liked what they found in the report. And we sold about 50 tickets at $79 each to that seminar. And about 50 people came out. I don't know what that is. It's about $4,000. When you subtracted out all of the cost from putting on the seminar, sending out the reports, paying my dad for the copies, all that stuff, getting my friend here on an airplane, having a hotel, we netted about $1,000 each, $2,000 total net profit on the seminar. And I'm telling you, a star was born. Not that I was a star, but I saw that this could be done. And we went on to do the seminar again, and we decided the first time we did the seminar, we never asked anybody if they would want to buy anything from us after the seminar. We just took the money and ran. The second time, We asked people if they wanted to buy consulting. We had no idea how to do consulting, but we asked if they wanted it. We didn't know how much to charge, so we said $1,500. They said, for how long? We didn't know. We said for 6 months, and some people took us up, and they started giving us money. And within 6 months of the day that my dad told me, if you want more money, you got to make yourself worth more money, I had taken my income, not from $2,500 a month. I got completely out of the office supply company, and I was completely on my own. I was still in my dad's office. I was mooching office space from him. But there were just 2 of us, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And we had an office, and we had a business that started paying us $3,000 a month, and then $4,000 a month each. And my friend moved down from Utah to Texas, and we started a business, and we kept doing seminars, and we kept adding clients. And within a year, we added our first $5,000 a month client, and it was amazing. It was tremendous. This was in 1994 and into 1995. And by 1996, we started adding more clients and making more money, and I bought a house on my own income. Not the income my dad had been giving me, but income that I had earned on my own, okay? Now, by the year 2000, we were doing so well in that business 5 years later that we were making a lot of money. I mean, we were making a lot of money. We had some deals with some clients that were paying us very handsomely, and we were making a good $40,000, $50,000 a month each, putting money aside for future endeavors, which we ended up taking that company to over $20 million in sales a year. But here's the interesting thing. In 2000, let me check my notes. I believe it was 2000. Yep. In 2000, I moved into a house that was a nice house. It was my second house. I bought a starter house in 1995. And then in 2000, I bought a bigger house, a nicer house. It wasn't an awesome house, but it was a pretty nice house. Sat on 2 acres, beautiful house, Victorian. And my friend from college that got the MBA came to visit me, okay? First time I'd seen him in years. And he came to my house and he said, wow, this is a nice place. And I said, well, you know, I like it, whatever. I don't know what you say in that situation. And I started talking to him about his situation. And here's what I found. After his MBA, 2 years, he took a job immediately out of that program because the job market was better by the time he finished, and people were recruiting actively out of the MBA program. And he got a job with the company that paid him pretty well. It paid him about $70,000 a year. That was a lot of money for an MBA in those days, okay? Not a Harvard MBA, a Brigham Young University MBA. And by the time he had reached the year 2000, he had upped his income to almost $100,000 a year. And I asked him about starting his own business and all of his dreams and gas stations and mini marts and all that kind of stuff. And he just sort of sighed and he looked at me and he said, I can't do it. And I said, why can't you do it? He said, well, I've got a wife. I've got, I don't know what he had, 2 or 3 kids at the time. He says, I've got obligations. I've got a mortgage. I've got car payments. He says, I can't leave it. I don't have enough savings to withstand 6 months or a year of starting a business. I just can't do it. And he never did it. He came back and he visited me again in 2003. And in 2003, I had a serious discussion with him about coming to work for me and doing some things for me that would give him some opportunity on the upside to sort of have an intrapreneurship where you are inside of a company, but you've got a lot of latitude to build the company yourself and participate in the profits. And he just never could pull that trigger. And I realized how lucky I got to be rejected by the MBA programs, to be rejected by the job that would have taken me to Hong Kong. And I'm not saying that if I had gone those routes, I mean, who knows? Nobody ever knows what happens if you go a different direction at a certain point in your life. Maybe things turned out just fine. Maybe they turned out even better. You never know. But I know this. The route that I was going would have taken me to more of a job-type route, and I fear that I would have been stuck, like my friend, in a job that allowed me to not break out and do my own thing. I haven't talked to this friend in several years. I haven't talked to him since 2010. When I talked to him in 2010, this was a full 10 years after the first time he came and visited me, he was still doing the same thing. He worked for the same company, and he'd moved all the way up the ladder as far as he could go, and he couldn't go any further up unless members of the family that owned the business died. And I don't know how much money he was making, but it was not, where he had dreamed he would be. So that's a background story. It's called I Got Lucky. And I want you to think about this topic. The topic is called The Enemy Within. And if you know me very much, some of you know me. I'm 45 years old, so I'm at a certain age where when I was younger, I was a fan of the rock band Rush. And maybe you like Rush and maybe you don't. I don't know. Mostly guys like Rush. Not many girls like Rush. They think it's stupid. My wife hates it. But that's okay, because I'm not pinning the things that I like on what other people like. I like Rush. I like them a lot. And one of the reasons I like them is that they write songs, and they have from the very, very beginning, since the 70s. They've been in business for 40 years now. They're old men now. But they write songs that are very philosophically based. A lot of them have to do with choice and free will and charting your own destiny. They don't write songs about the typical sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of themes that I love Van Halen. They're a great band, but I don't think they stray too far out of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Rush is a whole different ballgame. They wrote a song in the 1980s, and it had the same title. It's where I got the title for this webinar. It's called The Enemy Within. And The Enemy Within spoke to me then, and it still speaks to me now. And I'm going to read you some of the lyrics, just the chorus, okay? And this is the key phrase that I took out of this so many years ago, and where I came up with this idea for this webinar. Here's the lyric. It says, "I'm not giving in to security under pressure. I'm not missing out on the promise of adventure. I'm not giving up on implausible dreams, not impossible dreams, but implausible dreams, experienced to extreme." So let me just repeat that one more time. I'm not giving in to security under pressure. I'm not missing out on the promise of adventure. I'm not giving up on implausible dreams, experienced to extremes. And then it goes on to talk about the enemy within, and it's got. I'll just read some of the lyrics. It's a song or a poem, if you will, so it has to be not taken literally. It's figurative, okay? It says, "Suspicious-looking stranger flashes you a dangerous grin. Shadows across your window. Was it only trees in the wind? Every breath a static charge, a tongue that tastes like tin. Steely-eyed outside to hide the enemy within." And it talks about fears that are not real, and they're perceived, and he calls them in this song the enemy within. And I want to discuss some of the enemies within us that keep us from achieving. And again, if you remember back to the beginning of this webinar, I said I want to focus primarily in on the entrepreneurial side of things here. I don't want to, we could talk about a lot of things that you want to accomplish in life, whether it be personal or relationships or spiritual or, exercise, whatever goals you might have. But I want to focus in just on you being a business owner and trying to get where you're going. And here's some of the things that the enemy within tells us. In the song, it's things like suspicious-looking strangers, flashes you a dangerous grin. Is he really a stranger? I don't really know. There's another part of this song. To you, is it movement or is it action? Is it contact or just reaction? It takes a little more persistence to get up and go the distance. It's about squashing these voices. And I want to tell you what the voices say. Let's start with the top. The first one that the enemy within tells you is that your dream is impossible. Implausible, impossible, you can't do it. That's what it tells you. It says don't expect too much. And as kids, we all know to dream big, and as we get older, somehow it gets squashed out of us. And as I get older, I realize that there's really no joy in financial security. There's comfort in financial security, but there's no joy inherently in it. There's only joy inherently in relationships and in service and in contribution and in productivity and in building things. Those are the areas where true joy comes from. So it's not about money. It's about building your dream. And if you build your dream right as an entrepreneur, it often involves money, right? That's just a byproduct. It's one of the byproducts. But the enemy within says, your dreams are impossible. It can't happen. It won't happen. I had an experience in the early 2000s. We had transformed our business in 2001 to a company that recruited, trained, and supported marketing consultants all over the country. We ultimately ended up recruiting about 1,100 of these people. And if we had time to go into the entire story, I'd tell you how that business failed and how it created a tremendous amount of financial difficulty for me in 2004. But that's not critical to this story. Here's what is interesting. As we were recruiting these people into this business, it was very expensive to get involved. It was a $35,000 licensing fee to be one of our consultants. And so naturally people wanted to do their due diligence, make sure that it was right for them and that it was a worthy place to spend their money. And I remember one of the claims that we would make is that as what we call the Master Consulting Agent, this was our program name, the MCA program, Master Consulting Agent, we said that you could make between $300,000 and $700,000 a year. Now, this was not a legal claim. It was a claim based on what we, my partner and I, had personally done. I told you in 1999 we were making $50,000 a month. That's $500,000 a year or something like that. And we could have been stuffing more in our pockets if we weren't putting it into our business. We could have been making close to $1 million a year in 1999. And a guy came into my office. This is when the program was pretty well established. We'd already had several hundred of these consulting agents all around the country. And a guy came to the office because he wanted to check us out. He wanted to see us in person. And he wanted to make sure that we were exactly what we said we were. And that was fine. We had people like that all the time that would come in and tour our facilities and say hi to everybody and see our operations. We had at various times anywhere between 60 and 90 employees. We occupied 16,000 square feet of office space in a very nice office location. It was a very common thing for people to come and check us out. And this guy came in and he walked into my office. He wanted to meet with me for a few minutes, and I had time, and I said I'd meet with him. And he came in, and it was very evident immediately that he had a huge chip on his shoulder. He was angry. And I'm not sure why he bothered to come if he was so angry, but he did, and he was there. And the chip was on his shoulder, and he came in, and the first thing he says is, well, how do I know that this really works? I said, I don't know, what are you talking about? He said, well, you say that you can make $300,000 to $700,000 a year. I just don't see how that's possible. And I said, well, why don't you think it's possible? He says, well, the way that you talk about making money in this business is making money from small businesses doing marketing consulting for them. And if you're working with small businesses, I don't see how they can pay big enough fees that you can actually make the kind of money that you're talking about, because the businesses themselves that you're asking to give you money for your services can't afford to give you enough money to add up to $300,000 to $700,000 a year. I looked at him and I said, well, that's just simply not true. You don't understand how this business works. And he continued. He persisted with his dogged questioning of me in just a very negative, skeptical attitude. So finally, I just cut him off and I said, look, I don't know what you believe or don't believe, but I'm telling you it's possible because I've done it. And he continued to badger, and I said, how much money did you make last year? And he said, well, it's personal information. It's none of your business. I said, I think it's my business. You're going to walk into my office. You're going to storm up to my desk. You're going to tell me that the opportunity that I'm selling is not viable. You're going to tell me that it can't be done. And I'm here to tell you that it can be done. And if you're going to treat me like that, then I'm going to treat you like this. How much money did you make? Just tell me. And he mumbled for a minute, and he said, well, 6 figures. I said, 6 figures? What do you mean 6 figures? $101,000 a year is 6 figures. So is $999,000 a year. But there's a huge difference between $100,000 and $999,000. How much money did you make last year? Just tell me. And he said, well, it was $125,000. And I said, and how much do you think you could make in your own business? How much do you wish you could make? How much do you want to make? He said, well, I don't know, a couple $100,000, $200,000-300,000. And I looked at him and I said, I don't remember what his name was, thank goodness, because I'd be telling the story and he'd probably hear it. He'd probably sue me. Let's say his name was Jack. It wasn't, but let's say his name was Jack. I said, Jack, you have no right to walk into my office and impose your limitations on my dream. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care how much money you made last year. I don't care how much money you make next year. But don't walk in here with your little worldview and impose your small slice of the world on me. Now, here's the thing. The guy was about 45 years old at the time. Now, at the time, I was in my early 30s still. I'm 45 now. I'm the same age now that he was then, approximately. But at that time, it hadn't been beat out of me. It still hasn't been beat out of me. But he was about 45 years old. And if you're 45 years old and you make $125,000 a year, or name any number, if you make $50,000 a year, if you make $500,000 a year, it doesn't matter what the amount is. But in his case, Jack's case, if you make $125,000 a year and you're a good person, you're an honest person, you're a hardworking person, you're a diligent person, you do things that you're supposed to do, and after all of that, at age 45, the most you've ever been able to make is $125,000 a year, it kind of teaches you a lesson that about $125,000 a year is the most you can make. And it completely shuts down any possibility of believing, comprehending, or taking action to get to any kind of a higher level. It's a limiting belief. It's the enemy within saying it's not possible. It can't happen. And I'm telling you, it happens at every single income level, whether it's 100,000. You know, for me, originally it was at 2,000. Then you get to 100,000, then you get to 300,000, then, you know, on up from there. It never ceases to exist. The enemy within says that's the most that's possible. And when you get to a certain level of having made a certain amount of money, after putting in a certain amount of effort, you start to believe that that's about as good as it gets. Okay? It's not true. The enemy within says your dream is impossible. Don't expect too much. Okay? Here's what else it says. Moving right along in this discussion because we're getting later on time than I had anticipated. The enemy within says you can do it later. You don't have to worry about it right now. Put it off. Put it off. You don't have to finish things. You can start, but don't finish. Or you don't even have to start. Just put it off. Right now is not important. You'll have time later. And as a guy who just turned 45 a couple weeks ago, I'm telling you, man, later comes really soon. And if you haven't done it, you wake up and you go, what happened? What happened? Start it later. I'll give you another experience from that same MCA program. The MCA program, which was our program where we recruited, trained, and supported marketing consultants. In 2004, I worked very diligently the previous year, 2003, to record and produce the first 10 CD set of Monopolize Your Marketplace. It was a landmark event. It was the first time we had taken all of the MOAM concepts and condensed them into one streamlined audio CD presentation. And I stood in front of a group of about 500 of our consultants that came for a national conference in Dallas, Texas. And the CDs had just been produced. We literally received the first set of final packaged CDs from the duplication house while I was at the conference. I had never even seen the actual final product until I walked out on stage, and I carried one with me. I'd just been handed it, and I said, hey, 500 of my consulting agents, these are people that had paid $35,000 for the privilege to be a marketing consultant. I said, I hold here in my hands the culmination of a year of hard work to put all of the principles that we espouse into the CD set, and I will make you an ironclad promise. And here's what the promise is. If you will listen to this CD 20 times through, it's 11 hours long, so that's 220 hours. If you will listen to this 20 times through, I will make you a promise, which is you will be successful in this business and you will not face marketing situations that you cannot handle. But you've got to listen to it 20 times. And everybody was ecstatic, and it was a meeting with 500 people in it, and they were all excited, and there was big cheers, and everybody was all gung-ho and all that kind of stuff. Well, that was January, that was the January 30th of 2004. I started doing a series of regional conferences around the country on May 7th of that same year. So here's what happened. February, March, and April had elapsed, and then it was the beginning of May. So just barely over 3 months. And I went and I did 2 conferences per week for about 8 or 10 weeks. And the first conferences I did were, the first one was in Nashville, Tennessee, and the second one was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The first meeting I went to, there were 8 consulting agents there in Nashville. And the next day in Florida, there were 22. So there were a total of 30 that I spoke to in 2 days. And this was one of those kinds of meetings where I was just going out there to show support and to do some training, answer questions, just be with the people that were part of our program. And I did something interesting when I went. When I first started speaking, it was a full-day event in both situations. I had them get out a piece of paper, and I said, I'm just going to ask you some questions, and I want you to write the answers down on a piece of paper, and then you're going to turn it in. And I said, question number 1, what's your name? Number 2, how long have you been involved with our business? Number 3, and I asked them just some basic questions about their business. How many clients did they have? How much money were they making? I asked them several questions. We got down to about the 7th or 8th or 9th question, and I asked them this question. How many times have you listened to the entire CD set all the way through? If you listened to it and you got to CD number 7, but you didn't get to 10, then that does not count as a completed listen. Only count the number of times you've listened to it all the way through. Okay? Now, this was a little over 3 months after the CD set was introduced. As far as I knew, every single consulting agent bought those. They had them. What do you think the average number of times people had listened was? What do you think it was? Well, here's the interesting thing. There were 2 guys. It just so happened that 2 guys had listened 8 times each. That was good. There were 8 people who had listened all the way through 1 time. There were 14 people that had listened 0 times. 0. 14. Half of the people, or 22 of the 30, had listened to it 0 or 1 times 3 months later. And I looked at him and I thought, how is this even possible? I don't understand it. You pay $35,000 to be involved with this program. I give you a tool. I make you a promise. It's the bedrock. It's not to be sacrilegious, but this CD set is the Bible of this business. Not the Bible of your life, not the Bible of, God or anything like that, but it's the Bible of this business. And 22 people out of 30 neglected it to the extent that 14 never listened to it all the way through even once, and 8 additional had only listened to it all the way through had listened to it 1 time in 3 months. Meanwhile, during that same exact 3-month period, I'd listened to it personally myself over 5 times. And I already knew what was on it because I'm the guy that freaking wrote it and recorded it. And I was, to be honest, I was disgusted with those people. Now, the business fell apart for lots of reasons later that year, in fact, in 2004. And a lot of those reasons had a lot to do with me and the way I ran that business and some of my deficiencies in management and ability. A lot of it had to do with some partnership issues that took a really bad turn for the worse. And those were all definite, real contributing factors. But there's another contributing factor to why that business failed, which was people wouldn't even take the time to do the very foundational things that would make all the difference in the world for them. Because the enemy within says, well, you can do it later. Start later. It doesn't matter. And I'm here to tell you that the best time to start is freaking right now. Right now. Now, the corollary to that is the enemy within. The corollary, this is the other side of the coin. So the first thing the enemy within tells us is that your dreams are impossible. Don't even try. If you do try, your enemy within tells you to start it later. Don't worry about it. You can do. There's time to do it later. And the corollary to that, the other side of that coin, and this is number 3, is indulge yourself. Okay? You deserve it. There's other things that you can do. Now, this is an interesting situation. We have a voice in our head. It's the enemy within. And that voice tells us that the ultimate value in life is what? If you had to answer that question right now, the ultimate value in life, the thing that you should obtain above all else is what? What would that be? And before your knee-jerk reaction says things that you know are the right answer, like relationships, family, peace, look at the real answer that most people would give. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm great and that I don't struggle with this. But you know what the number one thing that the enemy within tells us is the number one value in life, the thing to value above all else? Some people might say money, and it's actually not money. It's what money can buy. And I don't mean fame, and I don't mean prestige, and I don't mean honor, although those are things that some people place a high value on. Here's what it is. Ready? That's a big dramatic buildup. Here's the word. The word is comfort. Comfort. The ultimate value in life, according to the enemy within, is comfort. I value above all else being comfortable. And this gets us into all kinds of trouble, the quest for comfort, because it's a lot more comfortable to watch Judge Judy than it is to write an email that you need to send out to get new clients. It's a lot more comfortable to say to yourself, I'm doing these things with my children instead of doing something that will further your bigger goal, because you're telling yourself that my children are the most important thing and being comfortable is the most important thing. And you might be listening to me saying, well, wait a second, are you saying your children aren't the most important thing? They are. But here's what I'm also saying. It's easy to fool yourself and to lie to yourself and to say that you're doing things in the name of your children, in the name of spending time with them, when in reality, you're just being lazy, okay? Yes, spend time with your kids. Yes, build your relationships. But if you do it in the name of this is the most important thing and at the exclusion of other things that are ultimately important, then you're being lazy. It's easy to be lazy and tell yourself that the things that you're being lazy you deserve and that they're actually better. And what I'm trying to say, I guess, is this. You've got to evaluate your life and say, what are the things that are truly important to me, okay? And yes, family's on that list, and yes, relationships are on that list, and yes, health and spirituality are on that list. But here's something else that needs to be on that list. What about significance? What about contribution? What about building things, whatever those things are? If you want to read a great book, go look up this book. It's called Jansen's Gift, Jantzen', Jansen's Gift. I don't know if that's how you spell it or not, but you'll find it on Amazon. It's a book called Jansen's Gift by a woman named Pam Cope, I think, C-O-P-E. I could be wrong. This is a great book about a woman who realized that her life was hollow and shallow, even though she had much comfort in her life. And she decided to make a real difference. And she took herself out of this area of comfort. And what happened is she realized when her son was 15, she had, I think, 2 kids. Her son was 15 years old, normal kid, healthy kid, and all of a sudden he died one day. He just died. He didn't get in a car wreck. He didn't have an accident. He didn't have mental problems, any emotional problems. He just died. Suddenly he was there. Suddenly he was dead. It turns out he had some sort of rare heart problem, and it just happened. And she was devastated, as you can imagine. Her son was 15. Her kids meant everything to her. And she became extremely depressed. Depressed in a most unhealthy kind of a way. And she stayed there for something like a year. And by the way, the name of the book is Jansen's Gift. Her son who died, his name was Jansen. Okay, that's where that name of the book comes from. Well, after he died, they had told people in lieu of sending flowers or other mementos to contribute money to a fund in Jansen's name. And after a year of being depressed, she looked up one day and she realized that she had several $1,000s in this fund that people had contributed, and she had never even taken the time to think about it because she was so depressed. She was so worried and caught up in her own grief. And I can't remember exactly. It's been a couple years since I read the book, but I believe she had about 15 or 20, maybe $25,000 in this fund. And she was trying to figure out what to do with it, and she figured, well, this is something that'll give me something to focus on to take my mind off of Jansen and the grief that she was experiencing. And she met, by happenstance, a woman believe she met her on an airplane, who was Asian, and the woman spent her time and efforts traveling to Cambodia and Vietnam to help children who were homeless and girls that had been sold into prostitution, to get them out of these situations, and help kids that had deformities to get put into some sort of care or orphanage. And she told the woman, she said, well, I've got this money and I'd like to contribute to this cause, because this woman needed money, of course, to fund her projects. And the woman looked at her and said, that's a nice gesture, and we would be thrilled to have your money because it would really make a big difference. She said, but I'm going to challenge you to do something different with the money. I don't want your money. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to spend the money and come with me to Vietnam and Cambodia. And I want you to see it yourself. And she was still very much in the throes of grief. And she did. She went. She went with this woman. She didn't even know her. She got to know her a little bit, and she ended up going to Cambodia, and what she saw broke her heart. It changed her life. And she started donating her time and her money and all of this stuff to this cause of helping these children. And she took herself out of her comfort zone. And as the book continues, she had an experience where she was in New York City, and she was at a hotel, and she got the newspaper, and it was, I believe, the New York Times. There was a front page article on a Sunday edition that talked about children who lived in Ghana. Yes, the same country that the United States just beat in soccer a couple weeks ago. But unfortunately, Ghana, as good as they may be at soccer, not so good at human rights issues. And she read this article. This is probably a 10-year ago story at this point. But she read a story about children who were sold into slavery to work on the lake there. There's this huge, huge lake that takes up a tremendous amount of area in Ghana. And a big part of the economy is fishing this lake. And these children were sold by their parents. Not just one or two kids, but commonly children would be sold by their parents into slavery. And they would work in tremendously dangerous conditions on this lake for fishermen. And generally, if they lived to the age of 20, the fishermen would then free them, and then they would take on their own slaves, and they would have their own boats, and they would just perpetuate the cycle. And she read this article about it, and there was a picture of a boy, and it said that his name was Mark in the story. And there was 7 or 8 other boys in the picture, but the one in the front was named Mark. And the journalist had said, this is Mark, and he works as a slave, and he was like 7 years old. And she saw this picture, and it broke her heart again. And she started calling around, trying to figure out, okay, so who's doing something about this? I'd like to participate. And she met dead end after dead end after dead end, and she finally discovered nobody, literally nobody, was doing anything about it. It had run in a major paper in New York City, and ostensibly thousands of people had seen this. She tracked down the journalist. The journalist had just reported it. She didn't know anything about it. So this woman decided she would do something about it. And so she started going to Ghana and started establishing some charities where she would help create orphanages in Ghana, rescue these boys out of slavery, work with the human rights authorities in Ghana, which was extremely difficult because they basically didn't care that this was happening. Anyway, this is a long story. Maybe you're listening to it going, oh, who cares? I don't care about this lady. But here's an interesting point, and this is sort of the climax of the book for me. She was sitting at her home. She lived in Oklahoma, I believe, Oklahoma City area. Her husband had a nice job. She, was working her charity work. And a gentleman came to visit her at her house, and he was an African, and he was very impressed with the work that she was doing. And she said at the time, she only had one kid, and she was past her depression to a certain extent at this point. This was years into this. And they had this big house, swimming pool, and the gentleman came over and said, we're so pleased with the work you're doing. It's making such a big difference. and it's so nice to see you doing all that you can. And she said, I just felt so stupid sitting there in my big 5,000 square foot house with this swimming pool, this humble rag-wearing gentleman from Africa. I don't know how he got there. I can't remember the situation. You have to read the book to get the details. And she said, I just did a self-audit and decided I'm not doing everything I can. I still value comfort over actually making a difference. And she went to her husband and said, that's it. We're selling the house. And they sold the house, and they took the money and they used it to help children in Ghana. They've actually moved to Dallas, I believe, and they run a charity out of here, and they do Ghana trips, and it's quite remarkable. Well, here's the point. You might be wondering, and sometimes I ramble on these stories, but the point is that the ultimate goal is not comfort. The ultimate goal is contribution, and that contribution for you can be made in 1,000 different ways. And if you don't follow your dreams because your inner voice, the enemy, tells you it's impossible or to start it later, and that the ultimate goal is comfort, it's not. The ultimate goal is not comfort. The ultimate goal is contribution and significance, not for the honor that it will bring to you, but for the good that it will do in this world. Okay? So I think that's where we're going to stop today. I've got some other stories, but we've already gone the better part of an hour here. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. I want you to think about the things we've talked about here. The enemy within tells us these lies. It's your dreams are impossible. Don't expect too much. Start later. Doesn't matter. Indulge yourself. The ultimate goal is comfort. And just one more. Just one more. Here's another thing the enemy within tells you. As soon as you taste success, you will inevitably taste hardships. You'll have bumps and bruises. I'm 20 years into my business now. 20 years. Been doing it a long time. And half the time I look at myself in the mirror and I think, I can't believe I've been doing this 20 years and I've only progressed this little teeny amount. You know, if you would ask me 15 years ago or 10 years ago, where would I be 20 years into my career? I would be far further. I would be creating far more significance in my field. I'd be making far more money that I could contribute to far more worthy causes. And I haven't done it. And the reason is because I've been kicked in the teeth more times than I care to number, including an extraordinarily hard kick in 2004, from wealthy to several $1 million in debt in the space of about 6 months. That's been hard to recover from. And I've had lots of experiences since then where I've had to make decisions in my business about moving forward or holding steady or adding employees or being more conservative. And the enemy within always says the same thing. Stay small. Don't do it. You'll fail. And it's the fear of failure. Here's what the enemy within tells you. When you fall down and your teeth get kicked in, here's what he says. He says, I told you that was what was going to happen. Don't get up. Just stay down. The ultimate goal is comfort. Do you know it's easy to be comfortable making $40,000 a year with a family, living in, whatever conditions you want, not living your dreams? You can find a certain kind of comfort. You can find that comfort in video games. You can find that comfort in television. You can find that comfort in, you name it. You can find it. I don't have to go into detail. Here's the point. Don't listen. Don't listen. I've got some suggestions for overcoming it, but I'm going to just leave it here. I think this is a good enough discussion. You've had some good concepts here. So, well, I'll finish with this. I'll give you the treadmill test. The treadmill test is as follows. Now, I'm a runner, and I enjoy running. It's something I do not just to be healthy, but I actually enjoy it. And I understand that that's probably not you. You may not enjoy it. But go with me on this test. Here's the treadmill test. Get on a treadmill, put it a little bit faster than you have the ability to go for a little bit longer than you have the ability to go. So let's say that your current ability is that you could run a 10-minute mile for 3 miles. So you could run 3 miles in 30 minutes, okay?
So here's my challenge to you if that were you. Put the treadmill on for 40 minutes and go 4.2 miles, a little bit faster than you normally go and a little bit further than you normally go. Now, here's why the treadmill test is so important, because it teaches you this principle. You know, if you've ever read the book or watched the movies about Steve Prefontaine, the famous distance runner from the early 1970s, who was quite iconic. He died at a very early age in an unfortunate car accident. But Steve Prefontaine used to talk about running, and the reason that he loved running so much is because he said it always come down to who can withstand the most pain. That was who was going to win. Whoever could withstand the most pain would be the winner. You know, in basketball, it's not so much about pain as it is about skill. And, of course, there's pain involved with developing skills, and I understand that. But with running, it comes down to, at that moment, who can endure the pain to push themselves harder. And this is kind of what the treadmill test is all about. Because when you get yourself on the treadmill, something happens that does not occur when you're running outside in a natural environment. If I'm running outside in a natural environment, I can make a subconscious or conscious decision to slow down ever so much. And I can make that shift down in pace, and I just start running slower. But on a treadmill, if you want to run slower, you have to reach up with your finger and push the button, right? You have to push the button. You have to be not only conscious, but you have to make a physical action to slow it down. And if you don't push the button, it doesn't slow down, and the pain increases as the time increases. And it's a very interesting metaphor for how much are you willing to endure? How much are you willing to suffer? How much are you willing to put up with to reach your goal? Now, obviously, this really has very little to do with running and treadmills, but I love the treadmill test because it allows you to develop a skill. Is this a developable skill? And the answer is it actually is a skill of not pushing the stop button and not listening to the voice. Because I'm telling you, when you get on that treadmill and you've got it going a little bit faster than you're comfortable with, for a little bit farther than you're comfortable with, it's going to start to tell you, the enemy within, you can't do it. It's impossible. Don't expect too much. Do it some other time. Don't do it right now. Get off the treadmill. You've got other things you could be doing. The ultimate goal is comfort. And if you fail, it's going to laugh at you and say, I told you so. But I'm telling you, this is a good way to develop that skill. And there's probably other ways you can think of. So that's really all I have for you today. There's some other interesting notes and points that I could point out to you, but I'm going to leave those. I don't know. We'll incorporate them somehow, some other way. That's it for now. I'm glad that we got some of the technology to work so you could at least hear me, and that's it. We'll be off actually for the next 2 weeks as I take my annual vacation to Idaho over the 4th of July. So it's good talking to you now, and we'll be back with you in the middle part of July. Bye now.